So I did a couple of breaches this morning on stream, and I'm going to try to code a couple more before I move on for the day. For those who are just tuning in, one of the things we do on the DBIR is we have to collect data, and one of our data sources is publicly disclosed breaches. And for anything that's publicly disclosed, we can keep it public. And so we have the VCDB project, the VERIS community database, which is in GitHub. And we record as issues all the breaches that have happened that we know about, and those get recorded as like actual issues. And then we go in and we code them over into a structured data format, VERIS, which is the one we use for the DBIR. But we publish them publicly so that anyone can use them. And in fact, people do. Researchers and academics use the database for various other things. And so I'm just kind of working through some of my backlog here and figured I'd give everyone else the opportunity to kind of participate. So we'll start off with the UMass one, and let's see what this is. I've already opened the links that are associated with it. The first thing we want to do is fill in the basic information, the GitHub ID. The next DBIR year will be 2020, and the analysis, the analyst. And let's take a look at what the breach was. So UMass Memorial Community Health Link in Worcester reports data breach. Hackers gained access to emails. So exciting. Let's see what happened. Victim of a phishing attack. That never happens. It happens a lot. Got access to patient information. Good to know. So this is going to be a breach. It's also probably going to be an integrity issue. It's going to have a social element. It wouldn't surprise me if there was a malware element as well. But we'll see if it says. Because a phishing email could be that they either sent a link and then just got access through the link, or that they dropped a file. So let's see. Just for a limited period, it's immediately secured accounts. It makes me think it was maybe a link where they filled in their credentials on a spoofed website, and then the attackers got access to their email. Mass reviewed all emails in the account to identify patients whose information. So yeah, that looks pretty much like what happened. So we'll copy the references into the record so that we have them. Oh boy, it's a really long link. And I did put in references, yeah. And at the end of it, we'll put reference number 2. Summary. Victim phished, leading to compromise of email account. And breach of medical data. Healthcare data, really. Well, we'll put medical because that's how we record it in the DBR. Is this an incident? Yes, it is. Confidence, we're pretty high. And then confidence. Breach occurred on April 18th of 2019. So it's nice to have exact dates when we fill these in. 2019, April 18th, I said, yeah. And then, does it give us a timeline? This is one of the problems, is on public breaches, a lot of times they don't have a whole lot of detail in the timeline. And we'll just have to accept that for now. Let's see. Happened on April 18th. Took immediate action. Immediate, it turns out, is not a length of time. And so it's going to be less than helpful for figuring out what happened here. Accounts of 2 employees, so that's good to know. All accounts of patient information, health information. Has begun mailing letters to patients. They belonging to 20 things. So you always got to include the other breach, just to tie in something else. Okay, so we don't have a lot of information on timeline. right? We don't know when that was limited time. See, that just doesn't help. We don't know how long it took to compromise the accounts. We would assume minutes since they were phished, but we just don't have a lot of information. Exfiltration, it doesn't give us any details on how long the people had access to the account. Let's see. And then discovery, again, they don't really say. I mean, they make it sound like it was short, but you know, that's kind of in their best interest to do that. And without including specifics, I'm hesitant to put down that it was, you know, hours or days or whatever. So we'll just mark the timeline's all unknown, though we do know the notification. We said letters started, patients began mailing letters to patients. And it said that in an article that was published in June. So we're going to mark notification happened in June. We don't exactly know when. Okay. Now the victim. This is UMass Memorial Health Link. And not only do we know that because it's in the article, it's spelled UMass on their building. Employee count. Well, we don't know that yet. So we'll use the definitive source of information and Google it. Because we're really just looking for a range here. You know, particularly we're trying to figure out if this is a big or a small organization. We have a couple ranges in the employee count. So 1 to 10, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, things like that. So we don't need to know exactly, we just need to know in general. Community Health Link, a member of UMass Memorial Healthcare, is a multi-service private nonprofit organization. Through its 80 programs and nearly 1,200 employees, it helps 21,000. Okay, so Community Health Link is 1,200 employees. Okay. And so 1,200, 1,000. Oh, yeah. And then we want to go and find the industry. And for the DBIR, we use what are called NICS codes, so North American Industry Classification Standard codes. And the easiest place to do is you can either Google it because there's a couple websites that list them for organizations, but if you generally know what kind of organization it is, like a hospital, you can look it up. We have massive numbers of hospitals. They're all 62210. So put that in there. Locations affected. Sounds like 1. They are US. So there we go. And region of the world, we use the M49 standard, but concatenate the two parts of it together. So the US is 19 and 021 for North America. And there's a couple others that we commonly use listed under here. The states we use ISO 3166-2. There's states, but there's also international codes. So it doesn't just apply to the United States. And you can look those up here. And you can use the US-MA or just MA. I'm going to copy the whole thing. So were there secondary victims? There were not secondary victims. That's different from the data of the customers being stolen, because really it was the victim was who was breached, and who was breached was the hospital. Go back here. So what happened? Well, we know it started with a social attack, phishing by email, and the target, does it say who received the emails? It was victimized by a phishing attack. It said something like 2 employees, right? 2 employees' email accounts. So it really doesn't say who the employees were. do we have a code for employees specifically? We've got a lot of detailed types of employees, but I don't think we have employees specifically, because employee is just part of the company, and implicitly is being part of the company. You know, you represent the victim. So this was used to infiltrate. And then they really, actually they used hacking. They used use of stolen credentials by way of the web application, the email server, to log in and look at the emails. And this was really used to exfiltrate data. So there weren't any errors. There's no reason to believe malware was involved. The article's written very much as if it wasn't. So we'll go talk about the actor. It's an external actor, but we don't really know a lot about what they did. We know that medical data was in the email, but there's no real clear information. Socials were compromised, email addresses were compromised, but we don't know why they did it. Or who it was. If we had to guess, we would probably say organized crime. And if we knew a little bit more about how it happened, that the attackers turned around and monetized it, we could say that, you know, this was kind of a structured attack. But we don't really. We don't know that it was organized crime, but it does seem to be, I mean, I want to say financial, but we really don't know what they did with the information. I mean, no one steals medical information really for anything other than financial purposes, because they use it for medical fraud. And unless you're doing a targeted attack where you're looking for one specific person's medical information, it's really not anything else. So do I want to go back and put organized crime as in these are criminals? Because if it's financial, it kind of implies it, but and it certainly fits what we know about the breach. It fits that we know the attackers got in. They phished the organization. They used the data to log back into the email, and it sounds like they're pretty sure that. I mean, no, they aren't pretty sure. They know that they went through the emails and it had medical information in the accounts, but they don't know how it was used. They don't know that the attacker exfiltrated. So, you know, I'm going to put unknown. We know in hacking the data was exfiltrated because the attacker looked at some of the email, like inherently by accessing, but we don't know that they took the medical data. So we've marked our external actor. Country, we do not know the country of the attacker. So we're going to find unknown. We're going to choose it. And we obviously don't know the region. Remove that. No internal actor, no partner actor. So we can talk about the assets. And so the first asset that was compromised was the person. Say person unknown. In the amount, we know there were 2 people that were compromised. And the reason people were compromised is that they received the phishing email and then they took an action they shouldn't based on the phishing email. And so really the first step is compromising the person in a social attack. And then that gave the attackers access to credentials. And so they turned around and used the credentials to log into the mail server. So server, web application, and and not really a mail server. We wouldn't really add a mail server because, you know, it's unlikely this attack was actually through the mail system. It was directly through the attacker went and kind of browsed the inbox, so to speak. Otherwise, they would know specifically what they had sent to the attacker. which makes us think it's a web app. And so really 4 assets total were compromised. Cloud, we're trying really hard to fill cloud in when we know, but we don't know in this case. I mean, if they had said something about a specific cloud email provider, we would know. But we don't know if this was like their OWA account or something else. So I'm going to mark unknown. In country, again, the assets were in the US. So you can be pretty confident about that since they housed medical data. US is where I'm looking for. There we go. And we've coded the assets. And the attribute, yes. And what we know has been breached is 2 credentials. That is really that. And then we're going to also add a second unknown and unknown amount, because we know that what was breached was, well, what we're going to do is we're going to say emails, so internal data. And we know that some of those internal emails contained healthcare records, and that they protected on the assumption that the healthcare records were compromised. But the reality is they really didn't know that whether or not the attackers took them. There's no record. They don't say anywhere that, hey, the attackers downloaded blah, blah, blah. They say, if the email contained this information. And so they're going off of just the implicit fact that it was in the email and the attackers possibly could have done it. But our definition for a breach is confirmed disclosure to an unauthorized party. And we really don't have that for the medical data. We do have that for at least the emails in general, because we know the attacker logged in and looked at the email, because they go back and say that the attacker accessed the accounts. And so who are the data victims? Because we don't know if the patient data, well, I want to put one unknown in case of potential patient data, also employee data. So because of the passwords, and the victim organization because of their emails. Then data state, stored, transmitted we normally do if it's actually stolen during transmit between 2 legitimate organizations. If the attacker is just transmitting it to use it, so it was in the email database, access through the web app, if it's transmitted like that to the attacker, that doesn't really count as transmit. So we'll put stored. Then data abuse is unknown, so we don't know what the attacker did with the access they had. And so that's kind of the easy one, is to do the confidentiality, but we also have to code the integrity, right? Because the person did something different than they should have. And so this is what we code a lot of times with phishing, is alter behavior. Both phishing and like business email compromises, because the integrity of the person is breached as part of the attack. And so we'll add that in. And there was no availability loss, nothing, no unknown attributes. Was this targeted? If I had to guess, I would say not. More than likely the attackers bought a bunch of credentials and sprayed them across, and these 2 people just happened to be caught up in it. But we don't really know. There's nothing really clearly indicating what the motive was here, and without the motive, you can't really know whether it was targeted. Discovery method. This one was a little unclear from what I read. Access was limited. They reviewed the accounts because they didn't really talk about how they discovered it. More than likely, it was internal discovery. In fact, I'm going to mark internal discovery for this one, but unknown the specific tool that they used to catch it. And the reason is because external discovery, because they know so little about how the data was used, it's unlikely that it was discovered externally. If they had discovered, the attackers using or selling the data, that would have also probably come up somewhere in the record. And also because they talk about they detected it pretty quickly, that makes me think that they detected it internally, but not before the attackers kind of accessed the email account. So internal, and I mean, there's not a lot more we have to add. It's just unknown. Now, value chain is an interesting one, and I talked about this earlier in the stream, or in the morning stream. One of the things we'd like to start capturing in the DBIR is the stuff that goes into the attack before and after the actions on target. And so the attackers don't just walk up and have an attack. So in this example, right, the attackers had to develop very likely a simulated website for probably a cloud login service. You know, whatever your favorite, you know, web email is. They also had to get a bunch of email addresses. They had to have a mailer that sent them out. They had to have the tooling on the back end to capture logins. Like there's a bunch of things that have to happen before the breach. And if we knew about how this was used, let's say they use this to file Medicare fraud, we could, you know, document how it was cashed out. And then once they got the money, how did they launder it? And it'd be nice to know those things because, you know, ultimately there's only so far we can do in stopping breaches by enacting change during the actions on target. And so hopefully by looking at what happens before and after the breaches, we'll have an opportunity to find other places where we can intervene in the attacker's economics. But for this case, we don't really have a lot of detail because we don't really know kind of what happened before and after. And very likely most of VCB cases, we won't do that because we just don't have the detail. So impact, overall rating, like, I don't know. We'll go with distracting because they had to provide some credit monitoring. They probably didn't really lose much of anything, but they are having to announce it and are having to provide some credit monitoring, so there is some impact. Plus subsource, and this is, we try to, particularly for DB or the VCDB, we try to code events randomly so that we're sampling randomly from the population of public breaches that we know about, and so we don't bias our data. However, there are some things that we capture in a biased way. Things like healthcare records. For example, this one is a priority because it's a PHI DBR report. And so we code more of these than we do just random ones as a proportion. And so we're going to note that here so that if we go back and analyze, we can clean up the bias introduced by coding these. And the reason we do that is because sometimes we like to write healthcare specific reports, and to do that we need a large number of healthcare records, which a lot of times are public because healthcare breaches have to be reported publicly. But we're going to record that we chose this one not at random. And this comes into play in a couple of our other partners who have other subsource information. We don't know a lot about the forensics or the attacker difficulty level. That's pretty subjective in most cases anyway. The event chain is very important though, because we want to capture the order and the sequence that things happened in. In this case, it was a social attack by an external actor on a person that led to a breach of integrity. And then that turned into a hacking action using the credentials by an external person that used a server to breach confidentiality and to look at the data and such. And so security and maturity, we really don't know a lot about the maturity of the organization and created and modified or filled in automatically. And so with that, we can mark this one validated and we can save it. And we do our best in the web app to make it resilient so that if it crashes or it stops, it captures the data. But that isn't always the case. We're not perfect. And so it shows you the JSON, which is a valid VERIS record. At the end, it's easy to copy it into a text file just to save it as a secondary source. And so there we go, the fourth of the day. And so we will close this issue and we can go back and move on to another one. Before I go on, are there any questions from anyone watching? I wouldn't suspect so, but I want to give people a chance to ask if there's anything that they're curious about before we code the next incident. So I would be surprised, but maybe there's someone interested. I guess I have to, being new to streaming, I probably have to give like, what is it, 30 seconds or something of potential stream lag. I remember when I started like looking at streams, the lag was, it could be minutes behind. And it seems like it's gotten better now. And so, there's not quite as much lag between the stream and chat, but I think that I'm pretty sure it still exists. So it's important to give a little bit of time. Yeah, for now we'll go on. If anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in chat, and I'll try to answer them as it comes up. So next one, weight loss grants post customer health information without consent. Okie dokie. Let's see what this is. Like some of these breaches just are, okay, what happened here? So it's like a company, weight loss grants, I guess, which is a company, revealed the personal information without client's consent after news reports described how the organization failed to make payments to customers who qualified for rebates. What? Okay, so a company that promised to pay customers for losing weight has posted personal information about clients on its website. Okay. Interviewed several customers who owed as much as $1,900 by weight loss grants, a scheme designed to attract people to register with an affiliate plan. Okay, and so how did they make it public? This one is going to be an error, by the way. The company made a mistake in how they stored or shared their data. It sounds like someone found it. Several clients refused to pay. Several clients told them that they refused to pay. We only posted our side of the story to defend ourselves against the claim. Oh, so is it that... Okay, so the way I read this is people claim that they weren't getting paid what they deserved. And so the company posted the people's personal information in the rebuttal post that they made to, well, that's an interesting one. It's never a dull moment finding breach information. So, okay, let's get this started again. Analyst is again me. Security incident, yeah, appears so. This is GitHub ID 13567. We've got a couple of references. Why would they think this is a good idea? Okay. Earlier today, there was the one where the breach occurred in 2012, and was the company, like the service shut down in 2015, and the company found the breach in 2018, and they said in their disclosure letter that they discovered it through proactive monitoring. Proactive happening 6 years in the future. So, okay, how do you even summarize this? Company discloses private personal data while rebutting monetary disputes with customers, I guess. This is a new one for me. So confidence I guess the facts are pretty established. So, okay, do we have a date for when this happened, roughly? Let's look. Fights weight loss. Fight. So maybe companies said customers have until June 15th to request review and until June 30th. Okay. So let's say June of, what is this, 2018? 2019, I guess. So this is pretty recent. So 2019, June. It will probably happen in May. So May, and then we'll leave the day open. And compromise. I don't think that really applies because they posted it themselves. Exfiltration. Discovery. So this is, I mean, immediately? Like, it's got to be within hours because they posted the thing and someone looked and said, hey, my data's there. Containment. It doesn't say. Does it say how long before they pulled it down? So, his clients refused to pay, did not follow the rules. We only posted one side, our side of the story, to defend ourselves. But they posted clients' information. It's a huge invasion of privacy. Completely unacceptable. Company continued. After a follow-up report about, the company continued to complain about global news. Like kids bickering. Literally kids bickering. Okay, who is corresponding to the company to ask for non? At the end of the day, a Scorpion. Last, however, later, however, Wayloss changed its strategy entirely after a second broadcast aired. Grant published a notice on its website advising customers after I had to review. Oh, I don't know. It went back and forth, so let's assume it took them maybe days to hash this out. You know, it looks like it happened in May and happened in June. I could be swayed either way, but you know, it's not the biggest part of this. So the victim ID is weight loss grants. And how many employees they have? I'm going to guess not many. You may end up on LinkedIn trying to find out how many employees they have. Scams, okay. We'll try LinkedIn, and then if that doesn't have anything, we may just call them small because they're clearly not big. Let's see. Yeah, I don't see them on LinkedIn either. So, employee count, small. What industry? I mean, I guess it's IT. This probably is not often. Diet and weight loss reducing centers. But that's a question. Is this really a center, or is it more like just kind of an arbitrary service? But I guess it's serving the same purpose. I think this is a apt description of the company. Like, they could either be in healthcare, they could be in IT. But really, I think normally IT or technology isn't like a real category in most of the actual classification nomenclatures, NICs and CIS codes and stuff. And so I think that it's more appropriate to code them by what they do rather than the fact that they use computers to do it. And so that will put them in kind of diet and weight loss reducing centers. Locations affected, we'll assume 1. Locations, I mean, that's grants organizations, Better Business Bureau of California, I assume. No, Canada. So, go give that a look. Canada. And then the region is North America. So we'll add that, and we'll remove the secondary region. We don't really need a state. I guess it's Ontario, so this will give us an opportunity to look up a Canadian state or state equivalent. So provinces, Ontario is just ON. That's useful. So put that in. Secondary, there really weren't any secondary victims. And so the actions. Error. What type of error is this? That's a good question. I'm going to actually say gaff, because they basically, normally gaff is used when in like more social individual settings. So let's say that I'm a doctor at a cocktail party and I start blabbing on about my patients, that and discussing their PI. That would be a gaff. And so normally it's very individual, but in this case, I think it's a gaff through a website where they wanted to rebut the claims, and so they published the data without really thinking about what they were saying. This may be the first gaff that actually uses a server rather than a person as the asset. So, okay. I think carelessness is a... processes would be a good one, but we really don't know. I don't think they even had a process for anything like this. So carelessness sounds pretty reasonable. Close that. One action, it's the entire breach. The asset breached was their web server, because that's where the information was published. The asset involved in the breach. One asset. Who knows what was hosted on? Who knows if it was a cloud server? Yeah, but misuse implies malice. And I don't know that that it's clear that they were intentionally misusing the data. In fact, they were using it in a somewhat legitimate way to kind of rebut the claim. They just didn't realize that in doing that they were publicly disclosing it. The company, they point out in the article that the company itself is not known for their gracious use of customer data. I think they said it's the same company that runs Ashley Madison. But we'd have to assume malice without... I'm not sure we have any facts that would kind of make us believe that, if that makes sense. So, cloud, country, I think it's fair to say Canada. Yeah. I'll be honest, we probably could code this as a cloud service if we really wanted to. The chance that like a internet startup like that is running outside the cloud is pretty thin. Find their hosting provider or something, or just check the routes, which may be something we need to start doing on the DVR, is literally checking routes to hosts. So, but anyway, that codes up the asset, and then we can look at the attribute. This was a breach, so data disclosure, yes. The data was, I don't know, it sounds like personal data. It was like weight-based data, right? Okay. Sensitive data including weight and weight loss targets. They make scales that do that on purpose. But that's not really medical data. I don't think just your weight alone counts as medical, particularly when we talk in the context of medical and we're talking like billing information or information you could use for like medical fraud or like a diagnosis. This wasn't a diagnosis they were overweight, it was just their weight, which is personal information. And I don't know if we have an amount, because I don't think it says how many people were affected, does it? Hey, they were saying mention the names of some customers, so it's more than one. It was in a single article, so less than 1 billion. But we don't really use ranges for data, so I'm going to leave it empty. These were certainly their customers. So data was stored. I'd say stored unencrypted is pretty obvious. Abuse. if it's an error, it can't be an abuse because it's not criminally used. And then integrity, availability, that's not really. So was this targeted? Not applicable because it was an error. Discovery method. The people who were involved in the argument discovered it, or at least the news organization. Value chain, we talked about value chain a little bit. Then plus, this one probably has a subsource. Okay, PHIDBR. Anti-forensic measures really don't apply. Attacker difficulty is definitely, it's really not applicable, so we'll leave it empty. Event chain, single error by an internal actor on a server led to a compromise of confidentiality, and that's all it took. That's corrective action, control failure don't really apply. We'll validate it, and then we forgot something. Did we mess up actor? I thought we coded an external or an internal. Oh, we didn't. We need to choose an internal actor, and it's, who posted it is really the question. The developer, I mean, it was most certainly someone, either maybe executive or management at the company or a public relations manager or something. But I mean, at the end of the day, we really don't know. Motive, not applicable as an unintentional breach. Job change is not applicable. Job change comes up a lot when you have like a internal actor who maybe changed jobs or is misusing their access or privileges to get back at someone, like the quintessential fired guy who, re-encrypts or deletes a bunch of data on its way out, that kind of thing. So we'll save again, see if it validates. It does validate. I'm going to copy it off into a text file on the other screen. And we'll return. And we will close this one. Then we'll go back to my list and say knock off another one. So now the next two are just kind of exposed data, which are not exciting. Humana notifies 500 of a breach. Yeah. Curious operation. Doctor couple ransacks each other's clinics, steals medical tools. What the hell? Okay, I'm going to do that one because it just sounds really weird. But really, like, what? Okay, we got to read this one. Close the other ones. Come on. Okay. Nagpur, in a curious turn of events, a doctor couple ransacked each other's clinics and took away medical equipments and other valuables collectively worth RS 9.6 taka, which we converted one time. I forget what the exact conversion is. The baffling incident, the doctor couple, it seems, were separated. Cops had booked both the doctors on the basis of complaint counter-complaint. So one runs a gum and bone clinic. It's closed. She went to her clinic and found the clinic ransacked and the material lying inside. And she noticed medicine, dental, and a bunch of stuff stolen. Accused her husband of ransacking the clinic and stealing the material. The case took place in counter complaint against his wife. In his complaint, he runs an ear, nose, and throat clinic. The accused gained entry to his clinic and opened shutter locks by using duplicate keys. Stole a bunch of stuff. Medical equipment, mobile phone, gold ornaments. Booked the accused and mounted an in-depth... I don't know that this is a breach. Like, there's no indication that data was disclosed. It looks like they just stole each other's stuff. It wouldn't surprise me if it happened, but we kind of need to confirm data. And if it's not a breach, then it needs to be an incident, some compromise of confidentiality, integrity, or availability. But in general, for the DBIR, we do code against businesses. We don't necessarily code breaches of individuals, but we don't really code general theft. And really, the only thing stolen here is, it says a mobile phone, which really doesn't, which almost kind of sounds like a personal theft even. And so I'm going to go back and I'm going to mark this one ineligible. And we'll move on. So it's not a duplicate, invalid. And we should leave a reason why. What's this sound like? It sounds like straight theft, but no data stolen. So mark that in, add the comment, and close it. Okay, and we can close that one and be done with that silliness. Come back here and we'll look for another one. Cyber attack at Newport School didn't expose student data. Who knows what else it exposed? Doctor snooped into Broncos patient records. Happens all the time, but that might be a fun one to code. And then Elmsoft Senior Living responds to data security incident. Yeah, let's end on the doctor snooping. And this is one we see a lot in the DVR, like, or in VCDB particularly, in kind of public data sets, is medical professionals who find someone interesting that they kind of want to look at, and then they look at medical records without any kind of valid need. So let's again do the first things on our list. Put in the GitHub ID, tag the analyst, which is me. This seems confirmed. We will change it if that is not the case. And copy in the databreaches.net data. Big thank you to that site for doing a good job of capturing this kind of data as well. And then we'll see what happened. So Privacy Commissioner found several people inappropriately gained access to the EHR of the Humboldt Broncos team members involved in a deadly bus crash last April. 16 people were killed, 13 injured. It's been a major tragedy, and we're disappointed that people got tempted to peek. Okie dokie. We have more detail over here. Oh, we have dates. We love dates. In fact, that's the next thing we need to put in. So, medical professionals. Explanation. Go to timeline. So the incident occurred on 2018 April, and then 9th, and then compromised really, we'll say seconds because they had legitimate access. They just accessed it. This is going to be a misuse because they had legitimate access, like they had access to the system, but they misused it for things they shouldn't have. Exfiltration, they took the data over, it looks like, about a month, a little over a month. But because it's not months, months is like plural, and so that's like 2 months, or at least around 2 months. And so I'm going to say, so weeks in here. And I'm going to say 6 weeks. Or 5 weeks. So discovery, when did they discover it? Okay. say when they discovered it? Does it say when this article was written even? So it was written in February of 2019. And so, I mean, we know they discovered it, had discovered it in a few months. But we don't also know how long it took them to discover it. Part of the files are 10 patients, so we know the amount of data stolen. We know there were multiple actors, but we don't know how many. She consulted the records because her family members had heard one of the individuals had died and she wanted to verify the information. That's not how you do that. When employees' access were suspended, were given training, but have since resigned. Case number 2. Number 3. Oh my gosh. Whatever. Stuff happens. Does the other article say when it was? It's still February 12th. So I'm going to put February 12th as a notification, but we really don't. I don't think we know how long it actually took him to discover or contain it. We just know that notification happened 2019-02-12, at least by the February 12th, because that's when the articles got published. So who's the victim? The victim is the hospital, right? Found several probably access electric of Humber, but where did they access them at? Well, this is new. That's normally the first thing that comes up is who actually was breached. 4 reports posted noted that eHealth began monitoring Medicaid 3 days after the crash. Oh, and so they somehow started monitoring access to these pretty quickly. And so they were monitoring at the time, so they actually were watching it, and so discovery was actually pretty quick. They kind of discovered it as it happened, but it kept happening. So let's say discovery, is like hours at most, because they were watching. But they didn't really contain it because it kept happening. But we'll say containment then was days, because it stopped happening by it happened over entire period, so weeks really. Take my word for that. And this is eHealth Saskatchewan. So let's find out about eHealth Saskatchewan. They have a website. Yay. Let's see, does Google know how many people work for them? Are they a hospital? Powers patients and enables care. Official website. Residents, healthcare providers, care data and analytics. About us. Annual reports. So what are they? Yeah. Directory. Oh, they might be their government. Oh yeah, because this is maybe privatized healthcare. Maybe they have a centralized, or it's public healthcare. Maybe there's a central EHR. Oh, thank you. Give that a shot here. And so this would fall under government, public government, and regulatory, administration, conservation. We'll go with public health programs, unless there's a better option here. Human resources, fire protection, because it's really part of the public administration. But really, is it part of the public administration any more than it is healthcare? Right? Because really, it's not a hospital per se, but it may be the EMR, the records for the healthcare. It's not really a doctor's office. It's not, so they're not providing healthcare, community food, emergency, vocational. It feels like a healthcare. It feels like it should fall under 62. Because what will happen is if we code it as public services, when we roll up to industries, it'll get coded as public. And so the question is it more informative as a public organization or as a healthcare organization? Which one does it really is going to help people make more accurate decisions? My gut says that even though it's run by the government, it is more likely to help people in healthcare industries make accurate decisions. But it would be nice to have something that's a little bit more accurate, like as a kind of a supporting service. Because it's not really a laboratory, it's not home care. I mean, like I said, Nix codes really don't handle technology well. So it's like the just generic other. In fact, what we might do is we might just put, instead of putting a detailed level, I'm just going to put 62. That records it as healthcare, and so it'll fall under healthcare, but it doesn't really subdivide it into any of the other sections. It's employee count. Here. This is the link that we looked at. Let's see. Oh. E-Health, Saskatchewan, employees. Wait, is it employee directory? Can I just like count? Employee. Oh. Can I just count the number of employees that work for him? I can search it apparently. Feels kind of wrong. Yeah, well. Let's go back and try something more indirect. Yeah, Saskatchewan. There's a lot of followers, but that doesn't tell us. So 200 employees, and normally this number is pretty low. Like it's substantially lower than the actual employee count, but it gives us a range, right? Because our ranges are 1 to 10, 11 to 100, and 100 to 1,000, and so it's probably safe to say they're in the 100 to 1,000 range. Locations affected, it's really that one location where they were storing the records. Let's see, in Canada. Again, and the region, of course, will be North America, and the state, or it's not really a state in Canada, the province. Oh, and where was it? I had these up a second ago. Oh, this is it. Saskatchewan, so SK. And that should take care of the victim information. And so the action, this was misuse. Let's see. Privilege misuse. The people abuse their privileges to access information on the information system. And we'll mark LAN access because they were probably dialing in over their network. By the way, this is why you see LAN access all the time in the DBIR. Is because so much misuse is just people getting on their computer on one side of the network and connecting to the data on the other side of the network. And LAN access is just kind of how it's normally captured. And so this is really exfiltration of data. They were exfiltrating it to themselves. And it's really just that one action, granted repeated several times, but we're just going to code this as a single breach. Actors were all internal, and they were, let's see, do we have anything for, yep, doctor and nurse. Then this falls under fun, right? And so when we say fun, ideology, or grudge, this is one of the things it falls under, is just curiosity, right? People just want to know the information. And so they go look it up without really thinking about whether they have the right to do it or not. Job change, and this is job change before the incident, not after. And so, let's see, is there just like these were normal people. There was nothing specifically in here. They weren't recently hired. They hadn't recently moved around. They weren't passed over. They didn't have personal issues or any of these other issues. So we'll just leave that one blank. There's our actor, and then our asset is going to be the EHR server. And so we'll just put server unknown because we don't have, or server other, because there's no choice for EHR in here. Electronic Health Record Server, or EMR, management, control management records, and whatever. And one of them was breached. We don't know the operating system. Probably not a cloud service. I don't think that there's any cloud EHRs running around right now. And the server was very likely in Canada, because where else would you want your own medical records stored? So that's our asset. Oh, I think I forgot total assets. There we go. And by the way, if you forget any field that's required, it will graciously ask you to go back and fix it like it did the last one. Targeted. This is very targeted, actually. These people specifically wanted to look at the victim's information. It wasn't that they were just, these were the easiest people to look at. These were the specific people that they wanted information on. So this one's actually targeted. And what was breached was confidentiality. Data was disclosed. I think it said 10 people's data, not 10. Variety medical records. And I think I said this earlier, but when we code something like medical records, we code the most detailed form of version of data, because medical records is always personal information as well. Like you always have names and addresses and things like that in the medical record. But rather than create duplicates, we code the most detailed description of the data. It was patient data. It was stored. We don't know if it was encrypted or unencrypted. It wasn't captured in transit. It wasn't captured during processing or printed. Data abuse. It was not abused criminally. Right? They looked at it, but they didn't go and sell it for medical fraud or anything. So we can close that. Discovery method, internal monitoring. Internal from HIDS, host ideas, incident response, infrastructure monitoring. Yeah, it was, so well, I mean, it's not really utilization, it was access monitoring. It wasn't IT review, it wasn't NIDS. Security alarm, not physical security. Incident response, didn't discover it. HIDS was an integrity thing. Fraud detection wasn't. Break-in discovered, employee discovered evidence of break-in. No, infrastructure monitoring is really the choice here. So we've got that captured. And then we talked about value chain a couple of breaches ago, so I won't talk about it again. Impact, overall rating, insignificant, really. Like they had to own up to it, but they really didn't do anything. They didn't have to spend anything or anything. So we'll fill that in. And in cases where we know like actual amounts paid out or money lost or things like that, we fill out a lot more detail here. But that's pretty rare. The reality is with breaches, a lot of times you don't know about how what the impact's going to be until several years later, or at least a year later, because it takes a lot of time for people to figure out, what the impact was, who was hurt, how much did it cost, how much did the company have to spend for the incident response? How much do they have to spend for the legal counsel? How much are they going to have to spend on things like consulting or on having someone paying set up credit monitoring? Excuse me. A lot of times they just don't know that information until much later on. Things like fines, just take a year or two to hash out. So we rarely know them when the breach happened, but we can go back into VCDB and update them if need be. So we'll skip, we got the impact. I'm going to go to plus. This is a PHIDBR source, subsource. These will be filled in, and then the action was misuse. The actor was internal. The asset was a server, the HR server, and the attribute compromise was confidentiality. And again, it's just a single action, right? We always think about breaches being like tons of things happening, but like everyone I've coded today has been one or maybe two actions. And that's the reality for the vast majority of our data. So security maturity, we really don't know any of this stuff. Control failures or anything. And so we'll mark this validated and we'll save it. And then, like I said before, it's not a bad idea to copy this out into a text file. So I'll copy that over to my text editor over on the other window, and then we'll return. And so what's happened is we now have a bunch of records in here, right? These are all the things that I've coded today. And since this is going to be the end of the day, I'm going to export these, and it'll give me a save file. I'm going to do that. We'll call this VCDB1, and I will to restart. We'll save this to where I've got VCDB cloned on my computer. Documents, development, VCDB. I have the most mundane, boring file structure of anyone in the world. And so when you're putting files in VCDB, there's a directory that's data, and then JSON, and then submitted. There's three directories actually under the data/JSON: submitted, override, and validated. And the reason that is because we have an internal script that every night pulls VCDB, and then it looks in the submitted directory, and it enriches and validates those records. And if they validate, it moves them into validated. But if not, it leaves them in submitted. And so this is a good way for us to provide incremental updates to VCDB without having to manually do a bunch of process and then manually go back and fix every single validated record every time they come up. And so by automating the process, we can get kind of quicker updates to VCDB. These should all be incorporated into the VCDB data frame in a day or two. Once I push, actually, I think I turned VCDB down to run like weekly, but these will be in the data set here in a week or two, as soon as the workflow runs. And so with that, we've kind of done several breaches today. We've gone over a couple different kinds of breaches. We've gone over a social one, misuse, a couple of errors. These are all really common breach types that we capture. These are the standard for public breaches. Like, they happen all the time, all over the place. So hopefully everyone kind of got something out of this. Again, if you need to, if you're interested in anything the DBR does, if you're interested in being a contributor, or learning more about how you could record records for your organization and do analysis, by all means, find me on Twitter, find me on LinkedIn, visit veriscommunity.net, or look at our VCDB, our open source data set, or VERIS, our schema that we use for capturing breaches. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.